So let's talk about tactical decision game development, aka TDG development. One way to think about developing TDGs is that you're telling a story, right? You've got a setting, you've got characters, and there are problems we have to solve. So we're taking the student through a story that leads to a challenge that requires a solution. So John Schmidt wrote an article called Designing Good TDGs, and he lays out several different ways that you can start developing a TDG. One way that he particularly likes is you just sit down and you start sketching out the scene, right? If it's, let's say, a tactical scene, you're a platoon commander, you just have some trees over here, there's maybe some hills over that way, maybe there's a road that bisects the map. And as the scene starts to come together, the scenario may just naturally flow. The first thing you want to do is go from macro to micro, big to small, right? So give us an overall sense of the situation. What is going on? So step 2, you can draw a picture, a sketch, some sort of visual aid that's going to help bring the scenario to life. So step 3, identify who we're playing, identify the role we're filling. The next step is really start to build out the scenario. You tell us about the unit, you tell us about the assets available to us, and you end up with what's called a triggering point. So your 5th and final step is to introduce your plot twist, the trigger point, the problem. Think of Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone and like the oh crap moment he has. That's what you want to leave your students with. You want them to have a bad feeling in the pit of their stomach. You want them to leave scratching their heads going, how am I gonna get out of this one? How are we gonna fix this problem? How are we gonna overcome this challenge? That's really, whatever you're doing your TDG on, whether it's something tactical or technical or something else, that's really what you're striving for. And something you really want to keep in mind when you're doing this is complexity. You want it to be a complex problem. It shouldn't be something easily solved. It shouldn't be something that a student can just say yes or no to, 1 or 2, A or B, black or white. It should be multifaceted. They should look at this and see that, you know, there are multiple angles I can take, there are multiple ways I can look at this. So that's something to keep in mind when you're introducing and thinking up your trigger point, your decision point, your problem. So it's a good practice to include contradictory, ambiguous, confusing information in your TDG. So here's an example. Let's say the text of the TDG says a village is 700 meters away. But when the student looks at the map, it's actually 500 meters away. You want the student to have to make a decision and have to work through this disconnect, to work through the confusion, to make an educated guess, to really use their judgment. That's one of the big reasons we do TDGs, is to exercise decision-making, exercise judgment. So it's okay from a development and design standpoint to put things in there that are going to leave the students kind of thinking, wait, what's going on here? This doesn't match that. That's okay. That's reflective of the real world. Oftentimes, the map doesn't always agree with what you see in front of you. So trying to get that sort of ambiguity, that confusion, into your scenario is something you want to strive for. All TDGs should involve some sort of friction, some complication, a delay and a force showing up, the enemy being where you didn't expect them to, something not working when it just had been a moment ago. You want that friction. You want something that, again, reflects the reality, the challenges of operating in the real world. So where do you get ideas for TDGs? You can look at a few places. You can look at historical battles and events, right? You can take a battle from even antiquity, World War I, World War II, wherever, and update it. You can change the forces to reflect, you know, modern weaponry, modern organization. So that's one place. If you've got a personal experience that you think would be useful for a TDG, you can do that. And a third place you can look is your own imagination, right? TDGs, one of the greatest benefits they have is you can just make them up. You can use your imagination to come up with a scenario. Imagination is probably your greatest source for TDGs. So here are a few tips on getting more bang for your buck out of your TDGs, more mileage, so to speak. So one thing you can do is you can take a scenario and then flip it. right? If you're playing the Marines in this scenario, take it from the enemy's perspective, right? And look at it, quite literally turn the map around and build the scenario from that point of view. Another thing you can do is shift the perspective from one unit to another. So let's say you're playing first squad leader in the scenario. The next scenario could be third squad leader, or maybe it's even a squad leader in an adjoining platoon in another unit. And that will very likely give you a totally different perspective, a different challenge, a different problem to solve. So another thing you can do is include details on things like the time of year, the season, what time of day is it? Is it raining outside? Are the Marines marching through mud? Is the sun beating down on them? This kind of gives you more of a feel of the situation, right? It gives you more context, more realism. So if you can provide that sort of detail, it'll make the TDG less vanilla and maybe more likely to stick and resonate with the students. So let's talk for a few moments about TDG formats. Most TDGs, typically speaking, are delivered on a sheet of paper, usually 1 to 2 sheets of paper, and you've got two elements. You've got the text and then some sort of sketch map, some sort of visual aid that helps bring the scenario to life. So that's one thing you can do. You can also just have a whiteboard and use markers to depict the situation and then deliver the scenario orally. You can use terrain model aids. If you're out in the field, that's one thing that you can really avail yourself of. Rocks and other available items to help depict the terrain and again, just deliver that scenario verbally. So when most Marines think about TDGs, they think about units maneuvering on a battlefield. There are other types of TDGs. You could even call them occupational decision games, right? So these look at problems and challenges in MOSs that maybe don't involve maneuvering on the enemy. So here's one example. You are a utilities Marine with an RCT and you're operating in 29 Palms. And the RCT is doing a command and control exercise. It's summertime, it's hot out, and you're going around and you're checking the equipment. And one of the things you're responsible for are the air conditioning units that give air condition to the various headquarters tents and communications tents. So you're doing your checks and you realize that one of the AC units is down for the communications tent. And the ops chief comes over and tells you, hey, Devil Dog, all the equipment is gonna get fried real soon if we don't get this air conditioner back up and running. What are you gonna do? That's a perfect scenario for an occupational decision game. It's tactical in the sense that you're operating at the tactical level, but again, it doesn't involve Marines firing and maneuvering on an enemy. So if you're looking for TDGs and examples of TDGs, you can go to a few places. The first we'd recommend is the Marine Corps Association Foundation website. The Marine Corps Gazette has been publishing TDGs for decades, and there's a link on the Marine Corps Association Foundation website with tons and tons of TDGs, so that's a place you can check out. Another place you can look is a Dropbox organized by the IAW team that includes additional TDGs organized by billet and MOS, and you'll find a ton of stuff there. Lots of resources, so that's a place to look as well. So bottom line, you can think of TDGs as stories with characters that end in a problem. You introduce your background. Step 2, you can draw a picture, a sketch. You introduce the person we're playing, you give us some context, and then you give us a plot twist, you give us a climax, you give us some sort of thing that the students have to overcome. And that thing should be challenging. It should be troublesome. It should be multifaceted, complex. You don't want to have a black or white problem. You want students to disagree. If you can get them to disagree with each other and to see the complexity of the problem before them, that's winning, that's gold.